I really should keep an eye on it. About 1 minute. Don't stress.
And also reasonably mute my phone, so now people in the US are waking up in my home.
You're not evil like me, and you always speculatively ring every presenter when they're halfway through, just to see. Oh, actually,
Who's the BCP about that?
I tell you what. Yeah, man.
Can we silence your
It's silence on the IM, because that's another thing that's really embarrassing. IM.
yes.
Little pop-up,
yeah,
pop-up that says, what rubbish is this person talking? So that's
We'd rather not do
whenever anyone's presenting, there's always IM them as well, just to see. Do seem to be lacking this. Don't panic, folks. We will start soon. We're just sorting out a few issues.
No one in this room should be surprised that Adrian and I have issues.
Yeah, I will live. No, we'll live. So, hi, I'm Adrian, that's Spencer. We are going to talk about writing good internet drafts. Hopefully that's why you're here, and you're not here because you got trapped in this part of the Hilton and couldn't find your way home. Why us? Who are we? Spencer is the wonder hamster, and I'm the old dog. For legacy reasons of our own internet domains and so on. Spencer is currently serving as a Transport Area Director and has done so for the last 5 years. That means he reviews all of the internet drafts that are produced by the IETF. So he's got quite a wide view of that. And he's been around even longer than me, which is why his beard is grey and mine isn't. He's done lots of stuff in the IETF, on the ISG. He's in the Internet Research Task Force, and you were on the IAB as well, weren't you?
Previously, yeah.
Yeah. I have just been appointed as the independent streams editor, independent submissions editor, and that means I'm responsible for RFCs that come outside the IETF process. I was 6 years on the IESG as the routing area director, and I've chaired working groups across sort of half of the IETF. Together, I looked it up, we have co-authored a total of 85 RFCs, so that is 1/10 of all RFCs. No, 1/100th, 1% of all RFCs.
Now I feel better.
Are our fault. Obviously, because of our time on the IESG, we have reviewed literally thousands of internet drafts. So what's the point? What's the point of being here? What's the point of posting an internet draft? Maybe you've got an idea you want the IETF to adopt. Maybe it's something you want to get published as an RFC to influence the standards that govern the internet. Maybe it's just some thoughts that you want to share. It's like a discussion document. whatever the point of it is, the implication is you want people to be able to read it and understand it. You want the process, the publication process, to run through successfully. And that may be through the ISG or the IETF or the IAB or the ISE. And so you actually need to get the people responsible for that publication process to agree, yes, this has to be published. And lastly, you want the RFC editor team to actually be able to publish it. So there's a publication process that says, here's the document, now let's turn it into proper English and format it correctly and get it out there. The document has to be in a form that can be done without the use of magic. So let's talk through the basic process steps. Let's take the microphone out of here so I can see the slide, which I can probably read and you probably can't from the back of the room, but there we go. The slides are online if you want to follow along that way. So anyone can post an ID, right? Anyone. There's no membership, no requirements. All you have to do is format it and give it to the submissions tool. There's no checks on the quality or the content of what's posted. There is a retrospective check. If you post something that is defamatory or illegal, then your internet draft will be removed, but otherwise, anything. Having posted it, it just sits there. So if you do not ask people to comment on it, to read it, then nothing happens. The best place to ask it for that sort of comment is on the appropriate mailing list. So go write emails. As it progresses, you can ask working group chairs to adopt it, so it becomes an official IETF internet draft. Usually the working group chairs go and poll their working group and say, do we want to work on this? Are we happy? And some working groups have teams of reviewers to vet the documents. And obviously the chairs review it. Once it's adopted, the working group owns the draft. And what that really means is that they are responsible for the content. So beware, you have your favorite idea, it's the best idea in the whole world. You bring it to a working group, they say, yes, we'd like to work on this. They adopt it, and then they change it. That's how the IETF consensus process works. So live with it, or don't bring it to the IETF. At some point, then, it's judged by the working group to be complete or complete-ish, and they go for a working group last call, which is for people to raise any remaining issues. It's then given to a designated shepherd, often the working group chairs, but not always. And they produce a short write-up and ask for publication, which means it gets handed to an area director who reviews the document, often sends it to their own directorate review team. When they're happy, it goes for IETF last call, and that involves a review by the community, by more directorates, by IANA, and ultimately by the whole of the IESG. And then finally, it goes to the RFC editor, who performs the rather important copy edit function. A short note about copyright and IPR. When you produce a draft and submit it, there's an automatic requirement that you include a piece of boilerplate text. The boilerplate text is something you need to read, and you may need to show it to your sponsoring company's legal team, because it says stuff about IPR and copyright. I am not a lawyer, and I've never played one in a television series, but I do know that this text says that you are making a personal declaration and statement to the IETF about IPR. So you are personally responsible for what you say. Your company is also carried along with that. So you're making a statement about them. And that means that your company's lawyers need to know what you're doing and be advised. The copyright is also there as well in the boilerplate, and you are agreeing to share your copyright with the IETF. So that means you post it, and then the IETF can use that text for other useful things. The copyright text can be varied under special circumstances, but it's pretty rare to do so. If you want to know how to do it, go read the RFCs that describe the process or talk to an area director.
Hey, Adrian, could I just add, one of the definitions of not looked upon so favorably is that you're kind of saying this is not going to be considered for a standards track. So this will not be a standard. If it, basically that's the bus you got off of by doing something different.
The standard approach in the software industry, and hopefully is now properly taught in computer science courses, is that the later you find a bug, the more expensive it is to fix. So finding a bug at specification is half the price of finding a bug at design, and it's half the price of finding it in code, and finding it in the field is really expensive. So we want to do the same with our documents. We want to get the bugs out early, before they've caused damage, and before people have become emotionally attached to what they've written. It's remarkable how often something comes up with a late stage problem with the document, and the authors really, really don't want to change it because it's their baby. Well, if they introduce their baby to the world much younger, it can be molded into the right shape. And that really means don't leave it to the last stage. Don't rely on the IESG to catch technical issues and to fix things. Talk to people much earlier in the process. Avoid the late surprises that cause pain. All right, so that's kind of like setting the scene, and now we can actually get into the how to do it, how to get a good internet draft. The first thing is get the format, the layout, and the mandatory sections in there right up front. That way you don't have to do any reformatting later, you don't have to make excuses. There are some tools which you can find off the RFC editor web pages that help you no end. So if you use something like XML to RFC, it puts in the sections for you. It can put in the boilerplate as well. Read the RFC editor's style guide. The style guide talks about two things. It talks about the sections you have to have and what information has to go in each section. And it talks about some basic do's and don'ts about how to write the text, how to, how deep to nest your bullet points, whether to write in slang or not. So the mandatory stuff, the sections that are in there, all of the boilerplate that's about IPR, about copyright, about the fact that internet drafts expire every 6 months, that's got to be present. To be honest, the way I do it is I go and look at the most recent draft that was posted and passed all the checks and copy it. But you can get a lot of it free with the tools. You have to have a security consideration section. You have to have an IANA consideration section. And we'll talk about those in a minute. It's really, really strongly recommended to have a manageability consideration section as well. And I wrote an RFC on manageability considerations, and there's an even better one. That's on another slide as well. There are other sections that may be helpful. Implementation status, telling people you've already written code and it's already in the field, helps people know how to take what you've written. Other sections that people might say are needed are not really needed. So if you read RFC 4041, it suggests you should have morality consideration section. You don't have to do it. You should do it. You'll be struck by lightning if you don't. So security. It's got to be there, and it has to be meaningful. It doesn't have to be there from day one, or it can be empty from day one, but by the time you're asking for working group last call, it's got to be real. It's got to be what you think is right. So don't just write what you think you can get away with. The security police will read it and will tell you you're wrong. Think about it. Think about attacks on your protocol, and think about attacks using your protocol. Are you using an old protocol in a new way? If so, relying on the old protocol security is not enough. Think about it. Privacy has become very, very important. So could your protocol be used for snooping? Could your protocol expose PII for people? Really work hard. It's your protocol. You want it to be secure and safe. So there's lots of relevant existing security documents that may be related to your protocol. You can go out and you can look at, if you go to the MPLS working group and search for the word security, you'll find a number of RFCs that are relevant for MPLS. So that's a good approach. Talk to working group chairs. They should know existing security work related to your area of work. And then look at some key resources. There are a number of RFCs that give guidance on how to write security sections, how to think about security and privacy. Go to the Security Directorate. The Security Directorate is a group of people who get security, and they have volunteered their time to review stuff. So when you've written your draft and it's, the basic protocol is there, you can go to the Directorate and say, help. Can you point me at what sort of security things I should be doing with this document? And you can always ask for help. Ask for help on mailing lists, ask for help from working group chairs, ask for help from ADs. People want to get security right. Oh, IANA. IANA considerations is another mandatory section, and you cannot be clear enough, okay? The text in this you should treat as if you're giving formal protocol instructions to a protocol engine, even though the person who's consuming it is a human. Because if this goes wrong, your protocol's broken. So you have to say which registries, be precise, which registries are you talking about? Use the name, exact name of the registry. Don't just say, there's a registry for protocol bits. But, nail it down. Write down exactly what you want the registry to say when the changes have been made. Don't say, oh, allocate me a value. Say, allocate a value saying this is its name, this is its purpose, this is the reference. Basically, cut and paste from the registry that exists into the draft, and then fill in what you want. Don't include other stuff. If you put sort of general discussion in the IANA considerations section, then IANA doesn't know, is this stuff they should put into the registry, or is it you just chatting? If you want to chat, put it in the rest of the draft. Okay? Big bugbear. Do not use explicit values when you write an IANA section for an existing registry. don't do it. Unless you've done early allocation or you're actually creating the registry, it's not your job to put values in there. It's IANA's job. And if you put values in there, you run all sorts of problems because somebody else might have written a draft also putting values in, and now you've got contention. The whole point of IANA is to sort that out. So use tags, conventionally use TBD, and identify which one. So if you're asking for 3 code points, have TBD1, TBD2, and TBD3, and that way it's all nice and clean. And then we've got a bunch of resources talking about how to write IANA considerations in 8126, and some discussion of experimental code points as well. If in doubt, ask your working group chairs for help. Manageability considerations, it's not a requirement that you do this, but honestly, you should, because you want your protocol to get used, you want it to get managed properly and be usable. You need to think about these things at day one. An absolute classic is OAM. OAM tends to get left out of protocols right the way through until they're in the field, and then it has to be reverse engineered. So a good protocol spec starts talking about manageability early. Bunch of references there. There's also an operations directorate. They are also volunteering their time to review your document and make suggestions. Okay, implementation status, which is talked about in 7942, really helps people understand where your document fits into the world, and that makes the reviewing a lot easier. Is it an idea you're punting? Is it an idea that's widely deployed? It's a proof that the document describes a protocol that works. It's a proof that there is readability and comprehension of your document. And it's okay to say at the end of this, nobody's implemented this yet, but 2 people have told me that they're really planning to. It's just giving extra information. Interestingly, this status is stripped from an RFC before publication, because it's reporting on a snapshot. It's saying, this is where we are in the process, the draft is here, this is what's been done. When the RFC is published, it's archived forever, and so this would get out of date immediately. So it's stripped out.
Okay, yeah.
What else? Nits and gripes. So when I was an area director, I would find that documents kept coming to me with the same sort of faults. And these resulted from a number of things, but most importantly, the document hadn't been reviewed widely enough. So when there's a document, it needs to get proper review in the right working group, and that may be multiple working groups. Increasingly, we're finding drafts span working groups. It's easy to get attention. You send a mail to multiple mailing lists. Done. If you're writing a document about a special subject that crosses areas, get the reviews. And the examples that I've given here, Yang Security Management, they're all special review teams out there to help get this right. So you may be living somewhere in the internet area, writing a Yang model. There's nobody in your working group who understands Yang. That's fine. Go to the Yang doctors. Say, help, I need help with this. A classic is the must, may, should, etc. language. It looks kind of trivial, but it's actually quite important to get it tight, because this is almost legal language for the interpretation of the implementer. And the V classic is, if you write should, when you receive this packet, you should do this. You're also implying that there is a may do something else. You've got to write it down. Otherwise, people will just say, it's a should, I don't have to do it. If it's an experiment, if you've gone for an experimental RFC, then you have to actually describe the experiment. How will I know if this experiment is a success? What are the parameters? Is it in a closed garden? Is it in the internet at large? And then lastly, in my pet nits and gripes, is backwards and forwards compatibility. If you're extending a protocol or you're writing a new protocol to replace something, talk about how that interacts with what's already there. If you're writing any protocol, talk about how it can be extended. What are the futures? So you've got to look both directions. And you can explicitly rule this out. You can say, this just does not work with BGP3. But if you don't say it, people don't know it. So there's some resources here. There's a checklist, things to think about, make sure you've done. Several ADs have written their own checklists, and those live on the IETF wiki. And there's a tool, a lovely little tool called IDNITs. If you post a draft without running it through IDNITs, you're wasting somebody's time. So it's really easy to do. It's online. You just go click, done. English. It's really easy for me to say write good English. It's not too difficult for Spencer as an American to say write good English. But it's, I understand that getting English right is pretty hard if it's not your native language. And frankly, don't ask me to write an ID in Swedish or Chinese, because I can't. So, I know I'm lucky here, but you want people to be able to read your draft. You want it to be in clear English, and you want it to be comprehensible. Really, you want that at the review stage. The RFC editor team will try to fix things as they do the copy edit. They will ask questions. Did you mean this when you said that? But there's a big risk, okay? They can only guess what you mean. And they can ask you then, is that what you meant? But you might not understand what they're saying. So there's a real danger that you introduce technical errors right at this very last stage of edit. And some of that is because when your copy editor says, this word should be that word, you say, oh, I didn't understand that because I'm not a native speaker, so let's change it. And then you actually change the meaning. So use resources, colleagues. If you're writing a draft, you probably have a colleague. You can say to them, could you read this through and tell me if it's clear? They don't have to fix it. They can just tell you that there's something wrong. That allows you to keep those issues private. You can talk to other people in the working group, and there are actually, usually in working groups, quite a lot of people who are keen to get involved. They want to help. So if you say, help, I've got this draft, I'd like somebody to review it for me for English, then you'll get answers. And then look at the RFC editor pages for various working group, workshop outputs and advice on writing IDs, and there's some links there. And lastly, there's an online spell checker for internet drafts. It's not got a perfect dictionary, but it's pretty good. It catches most of my typing errors. And why wouldn't you use that?
I did not know that. I'm learning something too.
Yeah, it's called ID Spell, and I think it's another of Henrik's wonderful tools. Excellent. So I think I've got just a few more slides before handing over to Spencer. Diagrams, okay. you're writing text, but do diagrams. Diagrams really help. Make them simple diagrams. It's nice and easy to understand a clear diagram. Modern art is harder to understand. ASCII art, okay, drawing pictures in ASCII is not a natural thing. Some people can just do it, some people can't. Don't worry if you find it hard. Get somebody to help. My key advice would be try to use boxes. Squares are easy to do in ASCII. Circles are really hard to do in ASCII and normally result in a road crash. The new rules coming to an internet draft near you soon are allowing SVG for figures, and we have yet to discover how well that will work, but that's going to allow you to do colors and circles and can we do animations? No animations, right. But I actually like ASCII art, and the reason I like ASCII art is that if you find that you cannot express your figure in 55 rows and 72 columns, then your figure is probably too complicated. Break it up. You know, zoom in and zoom out and do little figures. Because once a picture is really complicated, your reader is probably going to struggle. If you want to see what that future is going to look like with SVG and so forth, there's a FAQ on the RFC editor webpage which tells you all you need to know. So I went and looked at a random picture. I wonder how this looks from the back of the room. Yeah, it looks as bad as it looks on my laptop. So this is a really good example of what not to do. There are circles. There are kind of all the lines made up of zeros or O's. It's like why is that just not a simple line? And then there's some random floating characters in there as well. So if when you've drawn it, it doesn't look good, you know what? It's not good. But you can do, as RFC 8140 shows you, you can do clever things in ASCII, and they look fine. There's probably not a lot of need to do unicorns except in the transport area. But
Said the former routing area AD who carried a unicorn in every IETF meeting I saw him at. They keep talking.
yeah, mine are real unicorns. This is just a two-dimensional one. Right. Did you say what you meant to say? Okay. Not just is it clear, but is it clearly what you meant to say? So a knowledgeable reviewer and a friendly one will parse confusing text sympathetically. And if you wrote it yourself, you maybe don't even notice it's confusing because it says what you wrote it, so you know what it means. Try to think about it from the perspective of a newcomer, somebody who doesn't know the topic very well and has picked up your draft for the first time. Will it be clear? So sometimes the issues are English, we've talked about. Sometimes it's writing style. Short sentences are good, but writing a complex short sentence is bad. So my advice is normally use more words, but keep the sentences short. Use bullet points. Bullet points really help. Don't use the passive voice, or rather, the passive voice should not be used because it's a specification. You want to make it very clear who does what, when, why. We've also talked about RFC 2119 language. So ask for reviews, ask for more reviews, ask for more reviews, and then run it through the last calls and get everybody to look at it. Probably that list should really highlight ask for reviews from friends. They don't even have to be technically knowledgeable friends. They may be working in a different area of the IETF, but you met them over a beer and you'd like some help. Ask for help. And I picked an abstract from a draft, and this is not to get at the person concerned, so I picked one from somebody who works at the same company as me. And you can try to read this and parse it in your own time, but basically, about halfway through this abstract, when I first read it, I felt, I'm drowning. I have no idea what this is talking about. It's confusing, and it's garbled. And why would you put an abstract in a draft? The abstract is the bit that people read, okay? It's the hook. Why would you put that out there unless it's clear? Yeah, why have you written this draft? Okay, do try to tell your readers what it's there for. Don't just say, boo, here's an idea. Sometimes it can be really hard to write this down, but if you don't know it, then nobody else will know it. So state the problem you're solving clearly in a few words with a picture. That's like key. If you don't know what problem you're solving, then what are you doing? If you're not using a pre-existing mechanism, say so. Say why you're not doing it. Not just, oh, I've got something new and it works, but I've got something new and it works and it solves this deficiency. Be aware that a problem statement is not the same as a use case, often, sometimes. And use cases, I think we see a lot at the moment of drafts that try to list, they've got a wonderful new idea for a protocol, and then they list 10 use cases. And maybe 9 of them are just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. And one of them is the golden, if this is the problem you want to solve, this is the use case, and now I have a solution. So try to focus on what the real problem is, not just coming up with, oh, I could do this and I could do that. Does it work? Well, this is actually quite key if you're writing a protocol spec. Does it work? And usually getting the golden path through the code or the protocol is pretty easy, and getting that right. We don't engineer for edge cases, basically, because edge cases are suboptimal. We engineer for the golden path. But we have to cover the edge cases. If your protocol does not cover the edge cases, then basically, when people implement it, it's going to go strange. When it's being reviewed, you'll often get people saying, I wouldn't have done it like this. And that's actually not really relevant, because what they should be looking at is, does it actually work? If it's not really clear that your solution works, if you haven't actually documented the protocol in a clear way, people will jump on it and say, oh, I wouldn't have done it like that. The principal objective, and now we're back to why are we doing this, is to make interoperable implementations. So remove all ambiguity. Remove options if you can help it, because options give people a chance to make non-interoperable implementations. Catch all of the error cases. All right, when you post your first version of a draft, it does not need to be complete. It should have all the boilerplate, it should have place markers for stuff, but if you write a full spec the first time you post it, it is perfect, then probably nobody's going to review it and discuss it. It's kind of interesting psychology, but you want to hook the working group into talking about your document. But by the time you go to working group last call, and certainly by the time the document, he's just taking a photo of somebody with a red lanyard. But by the time you get to working group last call, the document really needs to be right. You must think it's complete. As independent submissions editor, I've just picked up a document which has got a publication request. It's got 3 sections in it that say TBD. Okay, that's not ready for publication. Gee, I'm running late.
Gosh, look at the time. So this is the part that Adrian asked me to help with, and so I'm talking about the stream-specific stuff. IETF stream is what a lot of us do, but it's not everything that we do. In that stream, we publish, and this is the only omission that I know in the material that I have, 4 kinds of RFCs, standards track, BCP, experimental, and informational RFCs. There's some guidance about where you kind of want to target that, but this is, figuring out what the right answer is still a minor art. Take your best shot, and the area director or even the ISG may ask questions about that. But like I say, start out in what looks like the right place to you. We usually publish drafts produced by working groups. ADs can sponsor drafts, but why not from a working group? And working groups have a lot of flexibility, but publication requested sets off a list of machinery. Next slide, please. The machinery looks like this. There's a formal state machine for publication. I've got that there. The reason you care is because state transitions are going to generate email that you will see as an author or as a shepherd or as a working group chair. And I have those listed there. So the AD looks at it and says, here's what I see. The expert reviews from the directorate get set off at last call time and get set off for telechats. The last call that you get, comments that you get from the community as a whole, the comments that you get from other area directors during ISG evaluation, the state going to approve. This is, you may think that you're finished, take a deep breath, you're not. And then things that are in the RFC editor queue, watch for questions from the editors. Resolving comments, and this is, I think, I hope this is valuable for people. You may see feedback from your AD during AD evaluation. You may see feedback from the broader IETF community during last call. You may see feedback from, where was my next one? Area review teams during last call, and even just before a telechat, and from other ADs during ISG evaluation. Your best strategy is to reply to emails with comments. To basically say, yes, this is what I think you're telling me, and this is what I think the response for that should be. You don't have to make changes to accommodate every comment, even from an area director. So please do the right thing. And talk to your document shepherd about when to submit updated drafts. That's hard to give general guidance for. One of the things is, I got review comments. Should I submit an updated draft? And the area director can, your area director can look and say, well, actually, no one else has balloted on it. This would be a great time to do that because none of the area directors have they need to see the new stuff that you've made changes to, because that's more correct than the stuff that you did publication requested on. Recent, this is also, I think, really important to say, recent ISGs have taken comments in no objection positions as seriously as they have taken comments in discussed positions. That's a good thing because that means that you're not getting discusses on things that the area director think matters, but doesn't trust the authors or the working group or the other area director to address the comment. Okay, we probably about a year in after I joined the ISG, we really kind of changed on that, and it's been that way for several years. Where we say we don't, we're not going to, you can put in a comment for a no objection position that says, this is not a discuss, but it's pretty, it's pretty worrying to me. Please take it seriously. So you may see comments like that. Those are not blocking positions, but somebody who likes you and is trying to help is trying to tell you something. They may be wrong, and they may not understand what's going on, especially if they're in another area, but they're really trying to help. So please help them help you. Next slide, please. Discuss ballots. Not that anyone would ever see one of these at the IETF. Please, that was an ironic statement. Please remember that a discuss is not a demand from the ISG for a change to your document. It is literally, we should talk. The current discuss criteria and non-criteria are at this link. Feel free to take a look at them. The common things that I see in discuss ballots on, the last 3 or 4 ISGs, I would say, the number one that I do is I can't understand what's going on here. So please keep non-experts in mind when you write. The people who implement the stuff that you're doing may not be in the working group. So making sure that people who haven't been involved in this protocol since somebody thought it up can implement it actually turns out to be a really useful thing for somebody to wonder about. This one a lot. This reveals personal identifiable information. So keep BCP, what is that, 138 in mind when you write. The most recent surprise that people have had was the realization, slowly and painfully at discuss ballot time, basically saying, you don't think of IP addresses as person identifying information, but a lot of IP addresses and IPv6 prefixes are only used by one person. So when somebody does something from that IP address or even from that prefix, they're kind of telling you something, and you might, maybe you want to tell people something, in your protocol about that, but don't let that be a surprise to you when somebody asks about it. We can do a lot. We can do a lot more if people have thought about it and have thought through the consequences than we can do if you say, I don't understand why this is personal identifying information. That's like the beginning of a conversation. This isn't safe on the open internet because of congestion or because of security or because of scaling or whatever reason. Something that has happened, and it happened about a year in after I joined the ISG, so 2014, was that we started, I'm a transport guy, right? So I'm here from the transport area and I'm here to help you. You guys really have to laugh at some of these statements because they're intended to be curious. But to say, we were doing a lot of stuff with encapsulations on UDP, so no congestion mechanism there, and it was not, some of the things that were being encapsulated had better congestion control mechanisms than others. Okay, so Adrian. And some other folk, David Black, I want to call out David Black, and there were some other folk, spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to do this, and what we've ended up with is saying that if you are doing something that is useful on the open internet, but may not be safe on the open internet, please explain to us what the considerations are to run it on the open internet, and then explain to us which of those considerations you can not worry about so much if you're on a managed closed network. And and I think basically all of the recent encapsulation drafts have done something like that. So, like I say, it's like, tell us the truth, but think about this stuff up front, and, you'll get a lot more no objections, and yet, I even about yes on some of this stuff. Why is this should, not a must? This is very much in the vein of what Adrian was saying about if it's a should, then that means somebody may not do it, and if somebody doesn't do it, what was supposed to happen? And we ask that question fairly frequently, and there's a real range of answers that we get back. One is that there is a reason that you would not do this. Awesome. Please put that in, should unless. If you say there are 2 or 3 reasons why you would do this, please give an example and explain what's supposed to happen if it doesn't happen. If you say, well, there's these legacy implementations that don't do this, and we want them to be conformant with the standard. You're like, that's awesome. So, like I said, just thinking about that up front. And what was my last one? Also need to describe what happens when something happens that shouldn't. Next slide, please. The IRTF stream, I'm also on the IRSG, so I see these also. They publish RFCs in their own stream, and the process for doing that is given in that link. RTF specific requirements for content in these drafts. Please note that. There's things like saying this is the output of a research group, and research. If you don't know much about the IRTF, research groups don't have to have consensus that this is the right thing to do. They only have to have consensus that publishing this is valuable. So what level of consensus did the research group have? Like I said, that's on the checklist, okay? So, be aware of that if you're going to be doing something in the IRTF stream. The drafts are usually the product of a research group. I've been on the IRSG for probably 7 years, and I wrote the only one that didn't come through a research group that I've seen go through the IRSG. So you don't have to go through a research group depending on what you're doing. I was writing a draft saying, here's what IETF people should know about the IRTF. So it didn't come through a research group, and that, Lars published that. But this stuff will usually come through a research group. They are not standards track. They are experimental or informational. There is no last call outside the research group before publication. This is very much in the, let 100 flowers bloom view of what research groups do. The IRSG provides review and guidance for these drafts, and that's explained in the publication process at the link. The ISG does what is called a RFC 5742 review for conflicts with IETF standards process, but does not approve IRTF stream drafts. If you crack open RFC 5742, it basically says these are the 5 things that the ISG can say back to the IRTF stream, IRTF stream controller. And, one of them is, we don't have any objection to this. One of them is, this is related to work in this working group, but that shouldn't block publication. And then, then you're like read down to number 5 or something like that, which is basically, this is extending a IETF protocol in ways that should go through the IETF process. So that's literally all that you're supposed to get back from the ISG if you're publishing in the IRTF stream. Next slide. The IAB also publishes in its own stream, and this is described in RFC 4845. These are often produced by entities that the IAB oversees, like IAB programs. I've got a draft in the IAB Stack Evolution program that's supposed to go out for community comment like next week or something. Published by the RFC editor, which the IAB has oversight responsibility for. Published by the IANA, which is the same thing. Workshop reports for workshops that the IAB has done. I've actually got, that's one of those. So, these are not standards track either. They are usually informational, and you can publish in the experimental drafts there. That's not common, but it's possible. The process is that you will be working closely with at least one IAB member. The whole IAB will review your work. The IAB will issue a IETF-wide call for comments, but this is not an IETF last call. They are not bound to seek consensus or resolve comments. The IAB, this is one of the beauties of the IAB, is the IAB can do the right thing even if they're the only people in the room that think that is the right thing. That's why they don't publish on the standards track. The IAB, the ISG can say, those guys are right, and they can write a BCP that says, those guys are right and you should read that, and we're going to act like those guys are right. So that's the linkage there, basically. The IESG does not perform RFC 57 and 42 conflict review for the IAB stream. In the independent stream,
yeah, so the independent stream publishes RFCs, but they are not IETF RFCs. Okay, be very clear. You can come to the independent stream and get an RFC, and you can pretend to be an IETF RFC, but it's not. The process is in 48, 46, and, well, what's going on? We're publishing documents that are rooted in the IETF standards process, so we're following that paradigm, but we're only producing informational or experimental RFCs. It's not intended to publish lots, and my first pushback is always, why can't this be an IETF RFC? But if there's some internet-related technologies that are not on the IETF agenda and not going to be on the IETF agenda, if there's a discussion of options or experiences, if there's a vendor-specific protocol that needs to be documented so that other people can produce implementations that interoperate, if there's a discussion of IETF processes or protocols, then those are all in scope. And this last one's quite important, and I think it's why the independent stream exists. There is a need for a safety valve so that if you feel that your idea has been blocked by some part of the IETF process, maybe an area director has sat on it and stopped it coming out, there's a way out of that to come to the independent submissions editor. The editor sends stuff out to volunteers for review and has an editorial board to help. Those reviews are not mandatory, they're not part of the consensus process, but they form a discussion. And you might look at this in the same way as a journal paper would get reviews, and you would discuss with the journal editor. These documents go to the IESG for a 5742 review. The principal purpose is that it's not an end run on IETF process or protocols. And the IESG can say, please don't publish or please wait. The ISE has full control and can say yes or no. The ISE does one other thing, which is once a year gets to publish April 1st RFCs. There has been some interesting conflict in the community about April 1st RFCs, because some folks say, but there are RFCs, we must take them seriously. Well, my advice to them is don't take any RFC seriously. But, you know, look at the date as well. I get to summarize. Okay, make your draft clear and meaningful. That's the most important thing. So write carefully. You want it to move quickly and smoothly forward. So do all the right things early for the process and for the cookbook. You, personally, you're writing the draft, you are responsible for making that high quality. So that means fix the problems early, ask for help early. Don't leave it right up to the editorial stage saying, yeah, they'll sort it out. Do not rely on the IESG and the RFC editor to catch and fix your problems, because that way is a good way to make those problems persist, to introduce new problems, to delay your work, and make everybody unhappy with you. So we have a very brief moment for any questions.
Sorry, I even have Friso Veenstra. Few questions. Can you hand over authorship to somebody else within the working group?
Yeah, so authorship's fun. You can hand your own draft, before it's a working group draft, over to anyone. When it's a working group draft, technically, the working group chairs appoint the editors. So if you were going to make that change, basically stepping back from it and giving it to somebody else, just talk to the working group chairs first and say, look, this is happening for this reason, is that okay? And usually that's fine.
Okay. Next question is, what drafts are very often quite dry. Drafts, in my humble opinion, should be accompanied by training material to accompany a draft so that it becomes understandable for everybody, like something like a YouTube animation. What is the standard and feeling around that type of training material?
So we are not against people understanding the documents that we produce. Anybody want to question that? What we've been doing for recent probably 7 or 8 years is we've started doing technical presentations, these tutorials on Sunday afternoon, including technical material there, like, here's the deal about Yang. So we've had one of those. That right now, that is probably the most common way that we do something like training for our material. Number one. Number two, it is fine for people to write user's guides and things like that. If it's useful to produce that in a working group, that would be fine. If it's not useful to produce that in a working group, but you understand how something works, and I'm not talking you, the person who's trying to understand it, I'm talking about you, the person who already understands it. This is, I'm writing a check for you here. This is a fine thing for the independent stream editor to publish and say, this is this person's best understanding of how this works and what, the ways you should use it and what the benefits are and things like that. That should be fine. And, that would be a pretty easy 5742 conflict review, which is, we would have no objection and we would actually be thrilled if somebody made the protocols easier to implement and easier to deploy and easier to operate.
I think there are two other things. Working groups often produce applicability statements. This is how you use this protocol or this set of protocols to achieve a particular function in the network. But they're still dry ASCII documents, but they're helping to explain the use case. The other thing is there is nothing to prevent an informational pointer reference to educational material about a protocol or a use case that lives outside the IETF. The only thing I would say about that is try to make it a stable, persistent URL so that when the thing's an RFC, in 5 years' time, people will still be able to look at that informational material.
If I could also just mention, so there's this plenary on Wednesday night. This would be a great thing to ask the ISG at that plenary and say, is this the best we can do? That would be a fine thing for the new ISG to hear.
Thank you. And my last question is, if RFCs are not come to maturity fast enough according to the work group and the work group chair, what is the process of dropping RFCs?
Do you mean something that has already been published as an RFC and now part of the IETF or the whole IETF wants to move on and say that's...
No.
No.
No, before, it is in working group status, an RFC, but after an amount of discussion, there is a consensus that this work will never come to maturity.
So you can simply let it expire and forget about it. Every 6 months, an internet draft is technically dead. My advice, however, is to repost the draft, replacing the text with a statement, we've given up on this for these reasons. So that the last thing that was ever posted as a draft with that name is a tombstone.
Very clear, thank you.
Yeah, there's actually a dead state in the data tracker for a draft that is, we almost made it over the wall, but it was not ready in time, or it was not as good an idea as we thought it was. And so if the working group chair tells the area director that, the area director can mark it that way, and everyone will know. And I think that's one of your part of your question is, how would anybody know?
Hi there, Stephen Banghart. There's been some talk recently about spinning privacy consideration off into a separate section rather than just having it in security considerations. Any thoughts on that?
I personally don't see much of a difference between Section 6 and Section 5.1. The important thing is to cover the material. If putting it in a separate major section forces people to remember it, then whatever.
Okay, thank you.
There are some considerations, and maybe this is a good thing for us to think about more. This is the first time we've done this tutorial. So one thing for us to mention, maybe as we're talking about debriefing, is to say basically, why are some things the way they are? And so one of the things with the structure of the internet drafts and what we're expecting to see is that if I've seen a working group draft with acknowledgement section and then like a description of the experiment. As I got that as the area director, and my guidance back was everybody stops reading when they get to the IANA considerations. They think they're through. If you want anybody to read this, I would move it above that. There's no rule about that. But that's kind of the way the community thinks about things, and you're kind of fitting into the way the community thinks about things, so that people will understand, will know what they're looking at.
Okay, thanks.
So I get the sense that people are leaving the room, but there are still questions. So we ought to finish, but please come and ask your question to us afterwards. And there's one other thing, the EDU team asks, could you please fill in the surveys about the tutorials so that they can help plan. But we're here all week, so come and ask us questions.
We are here all week. Please tip your waitress. And thank you all.
The mics are still live. The microphones are still live. Yeah.